Tabitha Lord with Book Club Babble, and I am so pleased this evening to be featuring Jon McGoran. Welcome, Jon.
Hey, thanks, Tabitha. I'm really
How
happy
are
to be here.
you?
Yeah,
Good
I'm
to
doing
see you.
great. I'm doing great. I'm excited to be on with you.
Awesome. Well, a few housekeeping notes before we dive in. If you're on with us now, we're streaming live on Facebook, and you would also send us some questions via the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. You can hover there. I'll see the messages, and I will pass them on, and we'll answer your questions. Again, we're streaming live on Facebook. This interview will be posted on YouTube and on the Book Club Babble site tomorrow. All right, welcome, Jon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we featured you on Book Club Babble before, but not on our Authors Cut Live, so we've never done the live interview piece. So this is exciting to be able to chat with you. And we're going to talk focus a little bit tonight about your newest book, Spliced, and I have it here, and I'm going to just show it because the cover is just so darn beautiful. I think, does it show backwards if it's on the screen? I don't know, but whatever.
Yeah,
People
kind
can
of.
get the idea
Oh, no.
that it is
No.
this gorgeous cover, which you must have been thrilled when you saw it.
So thrilled. I was thrilled when I saw the artwork, but then when I saw the actual, like, the cover itself, they did a really nice arc, bound galley with the image. But when I saw the final, the finished book with the embossed and the different textures and stuff, yeah, it's pretty exciting.
It's very exciting when you get out like a beautiful book cover like that. So let's just dive right into that. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for Spliced, and just give the readers a little bit of a little summary, your blurb.
Sure. Which I still need to tighten up. It's one of those things.
I know. It's okay.
You know how it is.
You are free to ramble for a few minutes. It's no problem. We won't judge you.
Thank you. So the idea came from my last three books. So I had a book come out in March. I did a media tie-in novel on the Blacklist, the TV show The Blacklist. But my three books prior to that were kind of biotech thrillers for Tor Forge. And I was researching one of those, and I read about this phenomenon. There's this thing that is going on now, that there are these people called biohackers, who just the same way that people used to tinker and build computers in their garages in the 70s and 80s when their computers were kind of new. There are people who are doing that with genetic engineering now. Which is kind of terrifying. It's kind of awesome. But it's definitely fascinating. Right, exactly. Right. So I was like, wow, I definitely want to write about that. And I had a lot of ideas in different directions where it could go. But I knew that I wanted to write a young adult. That was something that I'd wanted to do for a while. So I had this idea, I wondered what would happen to this kind of biohacking trend after it matured a bit, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years in the future. And as I was kind of wondering where it might go, I thought about, wow, what if it merged with the body modification kind of subculture? Right. And a phenomenon arose where young people were splicing animal genes into their own to kind of alter themselves in different ways. And that was basically the idea, the original idea for it. As the more I thought about it, the more the idea matured. I thought about what the world might look like in 40 or 50 years. That kind of informed why people might, it was funny. There's this interesting thing that I had the idea, and I realized, and it's basically based on gene therapy, mm-hmm. And I realized that if this technology was available, like as a street technology, right. There was absolutely no doubt in my mind that some people would do this.
Absolutely.
And I found that very compelling, but then I found myself drawn into wondering, who would do it and why would they do it? And as I kind of dug deeper into that, I thought about what the world would be like in 40 or 50 years when, we've passed peak oil, mm-hmm. when climate change has become much more of an undeniable reality, where animals are becoming extinct. We're in the middle of this, or the beginning of this massive extinction event that is anticipated. And that kind of informed the why, that kind of, some people would do it as a fashion statement. Some people would do it as an act of rebellion, but a lot of people would do it as a statement about what humanity has done to the world, and about kind of solidarity with the natural world, and just kind of all these kind of interesting political ideas.
Right.
And then once I had I kind of had this fuller notion of what the splicing would look like, and why these people would do it, and how the state of the world would inform their decision to do it. I realized that having something like this going on would definitely provoke a reaction.
Right. And that's what I want to ask you about next.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was super interesting, and so, there's so much that we could talk about where there's real world, similarities and parallels politically or socially or whatever. But, in response to this technology, this splicing thing, the backlash, the social backlash isn't to regulate that. It's to ostracize and dehumanize the people that have chosen to be spliced. And I thought that was a commentary on your part, and it was a really interesting way to bring a social commentary into the book. So can you talk a little bit about how that came about in your storytelling?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I realized right away that there would obviously, be some people who would be, vehemently opposed to this. I think there'd be a lot of people who are kind of mildly uncomfortable with it. And, as a parent, I'd be concerned.
Sure. You want to do what?
That's right. Exactly. But I did make a very conscious decision not to have the backlash take the form of a prohibition, but instead to take the form of, as you said, this kind of ostracization. And specifically in this book, it's a movement to declare that anyone whose DNA is not 100% human is no longer legally a person.
Right.
And there was a lot of thoughts went into that. And one of the things that I kind of I got a kick out of writing in the book is just how poorly crafted the law is, because I think that
doesn't sound familiar at all.
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly. Like, where did he get that idea? And it's funny. I started writing this, a few years ago, and definitely the world was changing as I was writing it, and certain things came to pass as I was editing it. But a lot of the ideas were there, and some of the unfortunate aspects of society today, I guess, were evident already.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's, I think that's a really important part of the book is that the people who are opposed to it don't focus on making it illegal or regulating it to make it safe or anything like that. Instead, they focus on, really dehumanizing,
Right.
On many levels, the people who go ahead and do this.
And I think that's that fear factor that we have as humans, to take the thing that we fear or is different or whatever, and then, we run all the way to the opposite extreme. And it's a real, it rang true to me that was the response versus the other more probably, measured response, which would be, hey, there's certain parts of this that are not safe. It's already out there. Let's figure out how to make it safer. But no, we ran right to the, and that seems to be like, human nature in some regards.
Yeah. And I think that there's, there's all sort, there's a huge range of reaction to it. And Jimmy, the protagonist, her reaction changes,
Right.
And that's a big part of the book.
Mm-hmm.
But also among the people who are opposed to it, there are those who are, really legitimately opposed to it or sincerely opposed to it. And then there are those who might be as sincerely opposed to it, but are primarily seeking to capitalize on it and politicize it and use it as a wedge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, a lot of the most divisive issues in society, there are those who feel strongly about it, and then there are those who may or may not feel strongly about it, but who are willing to incite a reaction among other people in order, for political gain or financial gain. Exactly.
Sure.
Exactly.
So let's talk about Jimmy a little bit. So you moved from writing adult novels to writing young adult.
Right.
And I thought Jimmy she had a great voice. And so obviously you're not a teenage girl.
Right. I'm not. No, it's true.
Mostly adult, adult novels in the past. So how did you find the right voice for her, and how was it different writing in the YA genre versus writing for adults?
Yeah. I mean, it was a bit of a challenge. or it seemed like it would be. And I took it very seriously, obviously, as you take seriously anything you write. My first three published novels were I wrote a series of forensic thrillers for Penguin under a pen name D.H. Dublin, and the protagonist was a woman. She was an adult. It was a little different. It was third person, which makes it a little easier. And this is first person, which is a little more challenging. The voice is a little more prominent. The relationship between the reader and the protagonist, and between the author and the protagonist, is more intimate. So it was. I wondered if I was, setting myself up for failure. But one of the things that I feel really strongly as a writer, and this is something that I kind of realized about myself as a writer when I was writing the D.H. Dublin books. Really, you have to know all of your characters, and in order for them to be believable, if man walking down the street, okay, maybe you can take a pass on that. But I do feel that all your secondary characters and any of your tertiary characters of any substance, in order to write them believably, in order to make them compelling as characters and believable as human beings, you have to be able to think from their point of view. Even if you're not writing from their point of view, when you're writing them, you need to think, you need to be aware of what their point of view is. You need to be aware of their motivations and their backgrounds, and, what makes them do the things that you are making them do, as the author. And that's really comforting. And I think it's good practice as a writer to kind of take all your characters that seriously. But once you've done that, then making the jump from being a middle-aged white guy writing about middle-aged white guys to being a middle-aged white guy writing a first-person protagonist that is an adolescent female, it helps. One of the things that I tell whenever I'm teaching writing or talking about writing, I'm a big outliner. And
right.
I think one of the really substantial and important and often unrecognized benefits of outlining and doing a lot of advanced thought work before you start writing the draft is that I feel like I really know my characters really well before I start writing the book, before I start writing the draft. And, you can get to know your characters while you're writing the draft. And I'm sure there's, I know for a fact that there's lots and lots and lots of, really wonderful writers out there who don't outline at all.
I don't understand that. I'm just saying.
I know.
Oh, it makes me.
It's terrifying. I was on a panel once with a mystery writer, which I think is, I think if you're.
Oh my God.
Mystery especially.
Right.
And we were talking about the difference between outlining and not outlining. And she said, oh, my last book, I was 85,000 words into it before I knew who had done it. And I was like, whoa, that's, there's the nightmare where you're in school with no pants on. And then there's the nightmare where you're 5,000 words into your first draft and you don't know who had done it. I found it's like terrifying to me.
Yeah.
But again, it's like one of the really strong things. So I think you can start writing a draft, and by the time you get to the end of it, now you really know your characters. Right. Then you go back and you have to do a whole lot of rewriting. And I think that's obviously it's a perfectly legitimate way of doing it. But in my mind, I like to know my plot, but I also really like to know my characters before I get started, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense to me. It's like if I don't know why they're doing things, I like to know what's going to happen, and I like to know why, and I like to know who, and I like to know, all those things. I like to know all the voices, so that I can write them. So with that in mind, it makes it a lot easier, kind of stepping outside yourself a lot more. And as a writer, I really like that challenge. I really, one of the things, so as I said, I had just written this Blacklist tie-in novel, and I really enjoy the challenge as a writer of of stepping outside of my voice and stepping outside of my sandbox. And you know, I wrote an X-Files short story, and you know, I've done a couple of those G.I. Joe and some zombies versus robots and stuff like that, and it's a hoot. It's a lot of fun.
Right.
And it's especially fun to kind of go through the exercise of learning this other voice and this other world, and
Right, finding it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Getting it right.
Yeah.
So Jimmy, I liked her character, and we kind of touched on this a little bit. She does change her mind about this whole thing. In the beginning, she is just trying to save her friend. She's actually trying to stop him from making what she considers a mistake, and then she's trying to save his life. And in the course of that, she becomes a real ally to the Chimeras. But she never chooses to get spliced herself, and you keep it that way. She never has the desire to do that, never, not even in solidarity or anything like that. And I thought that was a good choice. But can you talk a little bit about her character evolution and maybe why you kept her from taking that step into the world?
Yeah. I think that, you know, one of the things that I think is an important theme of the book is you know, just how easy it is to have preconceptions and to have prejudice and bigotry, and how easy it is to kind of dehumanize people that you don't know. And Jimmy is not like that. You know, I mean,
that's not her personality, but she's not really. She's really in it for her friend. She's just about Dell at first, and then later it becomes, you know.
Yeah, she doesn't lose all of her concerns, but she as she gets to know the Chimeras and she gets to care about them and respect them and understand them a little bit more, you know, she is a little less judgmental about it. I really wondered. I thought a long time about the decision to not have her get spliced in this book. And, you know, I don't want to, you know, give away too much.
Right.
But I'm working on the next one, and, you know, we haven't like officially announced the deal, but you know, we have a deal for 2 more, which I kind of had hoped would be the case.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. I'm really excited about it. I'm actually working on a flash fiction piece as well in the world, in conjunction with Small Business Saturday. There's going to be a little promotion with that, and that's kind of fun. Kind of just taking a little bite. But I, you know, I thought that with all that was going on in this book, it seemed that there wasn't really room for it. I thought that she is, you know, one of the things that I really like about Jimmy is, I mean, she's, you know, I think she's very open-minded, and I think that she is dynamic. You know, I think she's willing to and looking to and hoping to kind of grow and change and learn and widen her horizons. But I think she's kind of content with who she is. And I mean, I think she's a great character. You know, if I was her, I would be very pleased with who I was. You know, I think she's really strong, and she's loyal, and she's smart, and she's kind. And she doesn't feel the compulsion, you know, to change herself. And I think that's great, you know. That said, I also wanted to kind of leave the door open for other developments as we move forward.
Sure.
Yeah, and so yeah.
But I did like that choice in this book. Like you said, it didn't feel like there was room for that. She was, you know, her character development didn't need her to jump over that line to actually, you know, fully embrace this movement. And I thought that was a good point, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, it's tricky because I think there's, you know, the kind of notion of kind of the other who is the champion, you know, I think the savior or whatever. I think that can be a very valid criticism sometimes. And I was a little bit concerned about that. But I do think that it's important that, that she's an ally, and
Right.
that she, at this point in her life, she doesn't have to be a chimera in order to respect them, and in order to kind of fight alongside with them, and in order to know that the people who are persecuting them are wrong, that this is
Right.
something that's kind of a force of evil, and that she is fighting against.
Yeah. So in this world that the Chimeras live in and that Jimmy lives in, you sort of created a near futuristic world, and it's pretty well developed in there. And there were some interesting things that you took, environmentally and then socially and culturally, and you sort of really fleshed that out. Can you talk a little bit about that and just give the potential readers a little bit of a sense of the world that Jimmy inhabits and the Chimeras inhabit?
Sure. Yeah, there's, it's one of the things that I kind of struggle with as an author, especially if I'm writing something that is science fiction or science thrillers, which some of my previous books have been. There's so many cool ideas out there. There's so many ideas that I feel, that I see as really, really compelling and really fascinating and interrelated.
Right.
That I often have a hard time, I have to say, no, this book is about enough stuff.
Right.
It can't be about everything. You can write another book and it can be about those things. But that said, I thought that there were some things that were, that I found, fascinating, compelling, and that seemed that they were natural components of this world and of this book. And one of them is the kind of the state of the environment and the kind of not just from a climate standpoint, but from a kind of a political standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things that I realized as I was starting to work on the book was that if it was going to be set in the time frame that I envisioned, 30 to 50 years in the future, that climate change was going to be much, the things that I mentioned before were going to be much more, acute factors. And that informed things a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, there's an idea, I've been fascinated since I was a little kid with this notion of, not this notion of, but the reality of urban blight, and how, how these kind of confluence of factors can come together to really devastate areas and people's lives. I have lived in the Philadelphia area all my life. And North Philadelphia is a part of the city that has in most of my life has been very blighted. And parts of it, you can tell by looking at it, were really, really nice at one point. There's like this really grand architecture, and it's falling apart. And as going through life and becoming more of an educated and informed person, and learning about the kind of the demographic issues that led to that, and the political decisions, and the economic factors, and the technological factors, and all these things that kind of combine. And some of them are like really dry, like, these kind of, this highway was put here, and the decisions like that have all sorts of kind of subtle inputs, and some of them are totally innocent and innocuous, and some of them are a little more nefarious. Decisions to kind of disregard the interests of neighborhoods that are predominantly people of color. That there's all these kind of stages that contributed to this these negative impacts of our inner cities. And I, on the one hand, I kind of thought that I wanted aspects of this book to have treks. I wanted there to be journeys across the countryside. And I wondered what that would look like.
Right.
And I started thinking about what the technology would look like. And there was a bunch of kind of sub ideas that went into it. There was, in the backstory of the book, there have been flu epidemics, so there's depopulation.
Right.
There is, energy there is energy scarcity. So I kind of created this model where energy is so scarce, but the things that consume energy have become really efficient, so that the loss through transmission becomes a much more, I mean, it's kind of, this is kind of a little wonky, but
No, but I thought I could feel that you had thought it through.
I thought of that a lot.
And I feel like you said, I'm gonna age us up 50 years, and I'm gonna put some of these factors in and see what they would look like.
Right.
If X went here, this is the world, and it was and you did that really wonderful writer thing where it's just sprinkled in. It's not the focus of the book, but the world is very real and very vivid because it's just sprinkled in there enough that when it's important, you can see it, but the foundation was already, there. Because I remember the thing about the flu epidemic, and because you were just a mention of somebody's parent had died in the flu epidemic, and then someone was lost, and then they're riding the rail trains, and they're and it was just a really interesting world, but it was very clear, and I thought he must have really thought this through. Well, and really did a lot of work in this area.
Yeah, I did, and I mean, I think when you're writing a book like this, I think that's like part of the most, I mean, that's one of the fascinating elements of it, is kind of really, doing the deep dive into, into the world building like this. So the upshot of all that part of it, or one of the upshots, is that, that power distribution is very, very localized. So there's some people who can live wherever, they've got wind power and they've got solar power, but then you've got, the cities and the towns have centralized power, but the suburban sprawl in between them has kind of been abandoned,
right?
And is blighted. And I really thought it was, for me, I really found it fascinating, kind of flipping that blight and saying, okay, well, the suburbs are what is blighted because they're inefficient, because in this new power technology, regime, they just didn't make sense.
Right.
So I thought
it was really fascinating. I really enjoyed that piece of the book, and knowing that you had to really have thought about that, and the world building was really well done. So I
live in the suburb, just immediately outside of Philadelphia, about 300 yards outside of Philadelphia. And when I was first starting to work on the book, I guess about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever, it was a brutal winter. Like a brutal winter. Not so much cold wise, but just there were all these snowstorms, and we just kept losing electricity again and again and again. And the roads were just being torn apart. And it was really remarkable to me. It was kind of like, it's like, hey, thanks. That I'm trying to visualize, what would it look like? It's like,
there's no need for these suburbs anymore. It's just inefficient. Get rid of that.
This is what it would look like. And it really struck me, just like, wow, how quickly this would all crumble if it was not constantly being maintained,
Right.
It's
fascinating to think about how fragile our civilization really is in today. Aspects of it are more fragile than others, I think, too. But
absolutely,
we don't know how to do anything on our own anymore, really.
Well, one of the
when we really live off the grid, really, could we? I don't know. I think my husband jokes and he says, "I'll sacrifice myself to the zombies if it's needed because I know I'm just not going to make it."
Yeah, right. Exactly. I know. And the thing is, it's like one of the things, one of the kind of I think subtler aspects of this world, and it's kind of it's funny because when I first started writing my first stab at a novel in the mid 90s, like the late 90s. And at one point between a first draft and a revision, cell phones became ubiquitous, and they hadn't been, and it's like, oh my God, like every plot
just story. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's remarkable how, how many plot points before 1997
before
or whatever.
You could text.
Yeah, right. Exactly. They're all the inability to communicate at a distance, really makes story easier. So, one of the things that I've been observing, over the last couple of years is, just like all the Equifaxes and the Targets and all these data breaches and the hacking and the cyber wars and, all this stuff. So, there's another book that I've been working on that I've kind of, it's kind of killing me because I'm really excited about it, but I've had to kind of put it aside to concentrate on the next book in this series. Takes place in a similar time frame. It's a much different world in ways. But in both of them, I'm like, okay, no cell phones, no internet.
Get rid of them.
That'll
be much more fun to write about.
Yeah, right. It makes it a lot easier, but it's also, I think it's kind of realistic. This, and especially in this other book, there's this, like, people are like, really, you used to trust that stuff? You thought that you put in your social security number and you thought that was safe.
That was okay.
Oh my God, that's so quaint. Aren't you adorable? And it seems, every day it seems more and more like that's where we're headed.
Right. It's fascinating. So let's talk about you before we wrap up a little bit. So you're from Jersey. I know this. Philly. Yep. I know this. Philly.
The suburb of New Jersey, yeah.
But and you are the founding member of a thing called the Liars Club.
Yes.
Talk about the Liars Club for a second.
So the Liars Club, it was Jonathan Mayberry and Gregory Frost had this idea. And originally it was just kind of, we were going to get together as just authors supporting each other and kind of sharing information. And one of the first impetuses, I'm going to go with impetuses behind it was that there's a lot of when you're a writer and you're kind of trying to get started and you're trying to you're trying to get an agent, you're trying to get published. There's a lot of support. It's hard. It's really, really, really hard. But there's a lot of other people, going through the same thing. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of writers groups, there's a lot of kind of support mechanisms. But one of the things that we all kind of realized and observed was that there's this moment when you get published and all the people who you've been, or a lot of the people you've been depending on for support and who you've also been supporting, they don't have any experience and you don't have any experience, and it's just like this different world and you've got no idea how it works. So originally it was kind of this mutual support group, and it was Jonathan and Greg and myself and Leslie Banks, who was this amazing woman and tremendous writer who very tragically died a few years ago. She also wrote as Leslie Ellisdale Banks. Anyway, she was great. But so it was the four of us, and then it very quickly grew after that. There's a bunch of us now. It's about 13, I guess. And it very quickly, we realized that we wanted to be more outward facing, and that we wanted to kind of, especially in these years of the publishing industry kind of changing weekly. Yes. That if we could kind of support other writers, support readers, share what we've learned about the publishing industry, with each other, but also with anybody else who wanted to know it, that we could do some good. So it kind of took a bunch of different forms at first. We did a series of events supporting libraries. We did a series of events supporting independent bookstores. And we published an anthology of short stories, Liar, Liar, which the proceeds went to support literacy. But one of the biggest things that we've done is something that Jonathan Mayberry himself started actually before the Liars Club existed, and it has kind of become part of the Liars Club, and that's the Writers Coffee House, yes. Which is this amazing kind of not excessively structured event, but really, really helpful and useful. And it has kind of, it had been based in Philadelphia. Mayberry moved to San Diego, much to the East Coast dismay.
Nicer weather, good place to visit.
Yeah, I know. I think he's having a really good time out there. So he started one out there. Yeah. So there's two now in the Philadelphia area. I think there's one in Boston. There's one in Asheville. I think there's one in LA. There's one in San Diego. And it's just this kind of a monthly meetup of writers to kind of share information, to share questions, to network. Primarily the focus is about the publishing industry and the writing life. There is some talk about craft, as there always is. But it's been going on for over 10 years now, and I think it's been a really powerful thing. I've seen a lot of friendships formed. I've seen writing groups formed. I've seen collaborations come out of it. I've seen, businesses formed out of it. The other thing that the Liars Club is doing now, which I want to give a little plug, is we have a podcast.
Oh, yay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
Excellent.
the Liars Club Oddcast.
That's great.
It's on Project Entertainment Network. And it's kind of a hoot. It's a lot of fun. It's a little unwieldy sometimes. It's very casual. Our focus is creative types and the creative process,
Sure.
And pop culture. We mostly focus on writers, but we've had stand-up comedians and cartoonists and musicians and all sorts of creative types. The way we do it is there's actually 5 of us. So it's me, Greg Frost, Mary Jones, Kelly Smith, and Keith Strunk. And generally one of us will kind of take the lead on the interview. But we're all in the room together. So there's a lot of, there's some
Banter,
crosstalk.
talking all over each other.
Right, exactly. There's a lot of smart ass comments, which
makes it fun.
It makes it fun. Yeah, it's been a hoot. It's been great. So we've been doing it. I think we just had our 40th episode. We've been doing it at the beginning of the year. Yeah.
Excellent.
This past week we had Chris and Katrina Holm on it. I don't know do you know Chris Holm? He wrote The Killing Kind and The Red Right Hand in the Collector series. He's a great guy. He's a really good guy and a phenomenally talented writer. And he also he in his previous life was a molecular biologist. So
he's got a little street cred and sciencey stuff.
Well, exactly. So the poor guy, he's not writing science thrillers right now, but I use him as a source all the time.
Sure.
Great. And his wife Katrina is a very highly regarded reviewer. She writes for Kirkus and Publishers Weekly, and she's written for Criminal Element and a bunch of other places.
Nice.
So we had them both on at the same time.
That must have been fun. A husband and wife team?
Yes.
I don't know how that would work if my husband and I ever tried to do a podcast together. I don't know.
It was great. I was a little nervous about how it just
right?
was like, Jesus, we got 5 people here and 2 people there. It's
like trying to take a yoga class with your spouse. You're like, get on your mat. You just look on your own mat. Never mind, you have to talk to each other. Forget it.
Yeah, they seem kind of used to it.
Okay.
They were great. They had so
that's awesome.
That's Liars Club. Yeah, it's been great.
That was cool. I just wanted to mention that. And one last thing before we go, I just want to plug your books right before Spliced, because I've read all of those and we featured at least one of them on Book Club Babble in the past. And can you just talk a little bit about their ecological thrillers? And you have, I would say, you have an activist side to you that sort of crosses over with your work with this. And that was I found that to be such an interesting premise. The other books, this one obviously Spliced I loved, but those 2, and I just want to get those in one last time before we disconnect. So just give a little plug for that and a little overview of what your theme was for those booooks.
Yeah, sure. So the protagonist was Doyle Carrick.
I love him.
I know, so do I.
He's done now. Is he really done, or do you have more to
do? We'll see. But
okay.
I'm kind of focused on this right now. But he was a lot of fun to write. I mean, I could definitely see getting back to him at some point. So he's a cop. He's a Philadelphia cop. But the premise of the book, there are these science thrillers. So, one of the things that was fun about writing him, I like the idea of the kind of amateur, I mean, not sleuth, but I like people being pulled out of their elements and being thrust into these crazy situations. It makes it, as a reader, it makes it easier for me to identify with it. So with Doyle Carrick, he was a cop, but he kind of got pulled into these different situations that these science thriller plots that all had to do with biotech and agribusiness and pharmaceuticals and biopharmaceuticals. And for me, as I do have a bit of a I'm very concerned about the environment. I'm concerned about our food systems. Right now I'm concerned about the survival of our democracy. There's and that does inform my writing. So, one of the things that kind of shocked me is I guess it was probably 5 or 6 years ago now that I was starting to write those books. this kind of biotech revolution that had happened so quietly and nobody knew about it,
Because it's complicated. And
It's
if
very
not
complicated.
something you can get your head around really easily, people lose interest today.
Yes, exactly.
And that's what I think that's what I'm most attracted to about your writing is it's smart and it's well researched. And there's this piece under it that's, kind of a lot scary, but also really interesting.
Yeah.
And the science mind that I have too, kind of like enjoys getting into the depths of those topics. So yes, continue. Sorry.
I think it's, we're living in this fascinating time when there's a lot of, technologically and scientifically, for sure, there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of exciting developments, and some of them are a little scary. I write, I like to play around with genre a lot. And I definitely like to have elements of mystery in my books. And I like to have science and these Spliced is a science fiction book, but it's also a thriller.
Right.
One of the things that I think makes for a good thriller is if you can make it about a subject matter that is realistically scary.
Right.
And I think, you looking back at the history of thrillers, during the Cold War or about terrorists or about, I guess there's also kind of, serial killer, they're realistic threats. And that's,
Right.
That's part of what makes them distinctly scary as opposed to like
it
supernatural.
ups the stakes a bit,
Yeah, it does. It does. And so, so that kind of menace from something that's real makes your book more compelling. And so much of this stuff I find really scary and realistically so. So extinction events and contaminated food and all these kind of crazy things that we've seen. We're kind of seeing it happen.
Right.
I think that if I can kind of borrow some of that menace and use it to amp up the tension in the book, and at the same time talk about something that I think is a serious subject that it
Right.
warrants
some attention,
conversation. Exactly.
Yeah.
Then I think that I'm happy. From going from smart to from I wouldn't say sublime, but from smart to maybe a little stupid. I do want to say one thing about because this is hilarious, and I don't know if you've played around with it at all, but I think it's a hoot.
Oh, the Spliced thing?
Yes,
No, I didn't yet, but I started to, and then I got distracted. So I'm going to do it though.
It's so much fun.
I'm going to do it.
So I have a website, that's my author website, jonmcgoran.com. But I also have a site just for the book, spliced.world. And there's a page on it, spliceyourself.spliced.world. You can just go to spliced.world and click on the link. It's very obvious to see. But there's this great guy, Owen Zhao, who's a grad student, I believe at USC, who's just like this brilliant designer, and he's just a great guy. And I reached out to him, and kind of together, but mostly him, we put together this page where you can upload a picture of yourself, choose which animal you want to get spliced with, and choose if you want a 5% splice or a 15% splice.
I'm doing it as soon as we get off that. I'm totally doing it.
And some of them are great. The tiger is great, and the house cat is great, and the lion, and there's a couple of them that are just like, oh, there's like a leopard, and it's like, oh, that's awesome. And some of them are like really, really creepy. So there's a bird, which always ends up being weird. I think it's like an eagle or something, but there's an owl. And if you get a chance, you do the owl. It's terrifying. It's like really unsettling to see yourself spliced with an owl. It really is the creepiest damn thing. Spliceyourself.spliced.world. It's a hoot. And if you do it, there's a link, or you can just email it to me, and you can be part of the gallery of
outstanding. I'm on it either tonight or first thing in the morning. I'm splicing. I'm diving in. Well, on that note, I will say thank you so much for joining us tonight, Jon, and our audience. If you haven't spliced yourself, go get spliced and get the book Spliced. It was really phenomenal. Congratulations on another excellent story, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thanks so much, Tabitha. It's great talking with you.
Night.
All right, you too.